speech right now. Thank you.
All I really would like to do is remind us of some lessons we've learned in the United States. It's easy for us to look at a democracy that's been in existence for a while and to forget that the public face we tell of ourselves and the public history we give often conceals a lot of our own violence and our own constraints that we've provided against our own citizens. And I think there's some lessons we have of ways in which people have resisted and challenged those restraints that may prove useful at this time. One of the things that we've been, as the Hamer Institute, has been most concerned about is the fact that in a democracy, the people are the ones who are sovereign, right? We are the ones who govern, and when we don't take responsibility for it, when we abdicate those responsibilities, horrible things happen. And we have a history in the United States of those horrible things happening. And you know, the Southern Civil Rights Movement is one classic example of that, of the abuses and the violence that occurred for many years and continue to occur. But that's not the history we tell. We tell a very triumphant history of how wonderful everything is now and how horrible it was, and look, we solved the problem and we've moved on. And that's not necessarily the case. So there's two elements I'd like to talk about in terms of this. The first is that it's a history of resistance and struggle. It's a history of people challenging, disagreeing, fighting back, recognizing that the laws that are in place that often preclude due process, preclude equal protection, preclude the things we say are inherent for a democracy, require people to resist when those things are not provided. The second thing I think we have to remember is that violence and oppression is a way in which the state maintains its control. It can be done legally, it can be done illegally, but it's a constant part of that struggle. Today we see that struggle and the conflict between order and liberty, and I think we see this in most countries. Countries have a concern about the maintaining of order, making sure that there's stability, making sure that there's safety, but the question is, in a democracy, how do you do that in a way that still protects the liberty of the people, who I remind you are the sovereigns of the democracy. And so what I would argue, again, very quickly, is that means there's a very high interest in the state protecting dissent and the right of people to dissent, because it's only through dissent and challenging to the state that change occurs and that the state is held accountable. So 2 quick points. One, this idea of this technique of making dissenters illegal and making them terrorists is a long-held one that many democracies have exercised. We saw that in the United States with the declaring of people who were in civil rights organizations. They became communists, and during the Cold War, that was no slight accusation, and it had long-term implications. We saw the destruction of community centers like churches and schools, and this still often happens in communities where there's challenges and dissents. Often the first threat by either a local terrorist organization, paramilitary organization, or the state police is schools and churches and the destruction of those. So church bombings often occur. Well, why? Because that's a place where local people gather, local people govern themselves, local people have autonomy. And so it becomes an easy and dangerous threat. The other thing is the role of state-sponsored violence is often done under the justification of order. And this form of oppression is a means of constructing fear. The age of lynching in the United States, which existed for about 75 years and is incredibly underreported and not studied, very often we make it look like it's this romantic Western notion of local folks taking care, of upholding their own order, when actually they tended to be mass lynchings. There were entire communities coming together, targeting individuals, with the goal of holding people in fear and convincing them not to challenge the system. We also saw the role of mob violence. We had lots of mob violence in the United States. And this is where individual communities were targeted, and authorities gave sanction for those communities to be destroyed. Again, long history of this. So, why am I saying all this? There are ways to end it. I am hopeful because I see a history of when local people, when communities come together, when communities challenge things, oppression cannot stand. So I wanted to keep this short because I think the Q&A becomes very important, but I want to end with the words of Frederick Douglass. And I think what he has to say, he said in the 1860s, is as important for all of us today as it was then. And he says this: "Those who profess to favor freedom, yet depreciate agitation, are men who want crops without plowing up the ground. They want rain without thunder and lightning. They want the ocean without the awful roar of its many waters. This struggle may be a moral one, or it may be both moral and physical, but it must be a struggle. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and never will."